Srila Pradeshta, Srila Gaukishore Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Srila Pradeshta Saturday, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai. Srila Pradeshta Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Gauri Vedanta Charya Srila Baladev Vijibhushan Prabhu ki jai. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai. Srila Narottam Srinivas Shamananda Prabhu Chaya ki jai. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Shri Surup Damodar Roy Ramananda Shri Gopal Shridhari ki jai. Narataja Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Shri Vasili Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Adhijit Mayapur, Shri Mataji, Kotamajit, Mataji, Kodajit, Patijit, Tanajit, Patajamajit, Pavati, Shri Navajit, Dham ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna, Gopa Gopi, Gogovadan, Dvarasavayamaka, Shri Rajmanala ki jai. Shri Shamakand, Radhakand, Muna Ganga, Tatsi, Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Yogamaya Purnamasi ki jai. Bhapishwar Mahadev ki jai. Jagannath Baladev, Shri Bhatta, Shri Sanchakraja ki jai. Shri Purushottam Chaitra ki jai. Shri Bhagavan ki jai. Bhakti Prabhu Shri Prahlad Maharaj ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Antaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Adanta Karti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Samagata Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.
Oh, can you sit like on a chair over here, because if they're sitting behind me, then I have to turn all this way over to speak to them.
I think that's better than this. I think it's your cousin's.
Whose?
Did I go with that? I think so.
Oh.
Is this your child? Is this yours?
Yeah. You're good.
Can we worship it?
Huh?
Can we worship it?
Oh no, why is it a question?
They're all asking whose it is.
Oh, hey.
Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Patakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Bhangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaudatvishe Namaha Nityanandam Namastubhyam Premananda Pradayane Kalo Kalmasha Nashaya Janava Pataye Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam Shri Krishna Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate
Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Brindai Tulsi Devyai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satyavachai Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Gurudev Nitya Leela Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Siksha Gurudevs Nitya Leela Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj and Nitya Leela Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And I'm offering my Dandavat Pranams to the lotus feet of all of my Sri Rupa Nuga Guru Varga. And I'm offering my Dandavat Pranams to all the Vaishnavas and all the Vaishnavis. So, yesterday we had a little side story, but actually it was in relation to the subject matter of rasa. I was reviewing in my mind, how did I get into that story from rasa? But I knew that we were going to be reading the preface of Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion. I had planned to do that. Actually, I've been planning to do that for many months, but I just didn't get around to it. And now, because we became inspired by the song Shuno He Rasika Jan, and contemplating that topic, and many other topics that we've been covering, like Pinnacle of Devotion, which we started into but haven't completed. But we completed enough so far. But the topic is so important. I always tell people, many devotees have asked me over the years, oh Maharaj, there's so many books by so many different acharyas, and I'm brand new. What should I read first? I'm sure you've been asked those questions as well, some of you older devotees.
And us.
Maybe even younger devotees. So, you know what I answer? I really deeply thought about it. And especially when Gurudev's movement started to manifest all over the world. And so many books as well, you know. So, anyway, I suggested to devotees, I didn't make this a hard and fast rule, but I said, you know, really for the whole Western world, the whole Western civilization outside of India, Srila Prabhupada came for India as well, but his message was directed toward the whole world population, the average people, and the language that he used, and the subject matter that he always introduced. There are a number of subjects, but basically, always Bhagavad Gita would be the basis, practically, of all of his preaching. You know, it's hard to find a lecture where Srila Prabhupada doesn't quote at least one verse from Bhagavad Gita. So naturally, Srila Prabhupada was laying the foundation for his movement and for the world now and into the future to be able to embrace the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the two basic, most important literatures in this regard of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya is the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not some, unserious decision that he made to begin to translate the Srimad Bhagavatam 3 years before he came to the West. You know. And when he came to the West, somehow he did that instead of Bhagavad Gita, right? But it was necessary to begin that. There was a whole strategy, right? He had a whole strategy of translating the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, and that being the basis of his movement. And even when he was just barely surviving financially in New York, he's going and selling copies of his Srimad Bhagavatam. And not only that, even in some cases he was selling standing orders. You know what those are? That's when you've got a whole set that you're going to be producing in the future. And I think the whole library party thing that happened in the 70s was actually getting these orders for standing orders for all the future volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam that would be produced. And the professors, they would purchase that, and scholars and so forth. So Srila Prabhupada's movement is based on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's not by chance, because it just so happens that the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is based on Srimad Bhagavatam. So that had to be, and you know, he had a certain amount of time. But as soon as he came to the West, then he began to present the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. But in the beginning, did he have an authorized copy of the Bhagavad Gita to give to the English-speaking people that were attending his lectures? He had to use whose Bhagavad Gita? Sometimes Gita Press or Dr. Radha Krishnan, who was Mayavad, you know. He couldn't suggest to anybody, because they would ask him, Swamiji, can you tell us suggest any copy of Bhagavad Gita? Because even in those days, as Gopanandini was saying, in her library, there was like 3 different versions of Bhagavad Gita. So then Srila Prabhupada set himself to the task of translating and giving commentary on the Bhagavad Gita as it is, right? But then his manuscript was stolen. And that must have been, But the pure devotee takes everything somehow as Krishna's will. And anyway, eventually he was able to produce the whole Bhagavad Gita with all the purports and everything. But then there was a problem. Get a printer to accept it and get it printed. Macmillan Company agreed, but they would only agree to a abridged version. And I don't know what percentage of the purports, but I think more than 50% of the purports were taken out. Yeah. So imagine, you know, this whole movement, Bhagavad Gita, that's the first one I got at my music festival. I bought it. And I didn't even have any money. No, I'm going back to the same story. But just to let you know, they had the beads from a bead shop, which they were using for Japamala, and they just had like a package, and you had to string your own beads. So I actually bought that from them and strung my own beads.
Were they red?
Not red, they were brown, but they were like the same bead shop, completely round, you know. And the Bhagavad Gita, abridged version, the blue cover, you know, or purple cover. And I didn't have any money, so I went out to the crowds. Hey, got a dime? Hey, you got a dime? I mean, we used to do that in those days sometimes, you know. But barely anybody had any money. So it took me like 2 hours to get $1. The devotees told me, bring back $1. So I brought $1, and I got the Bhagavad Gita and my Japa Mala. Yeah. So that Bhagavad Gita was what we used for the whole first few years. Really, the contract had to expire with Macmillan. Prabhupada had to wait until something like 1974 or 75 to actually print the full, thick Bhagavad Gita. So, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. But then what did Prabhupada also see was very, very necessary to present to the whole world? He's now translating. He's now presenting books. And he's got the Srimad Bhagavatam going on slowly, however slowly in the beginning, you know, but it's happening. And Bhagavad Gita is there, but waiting for the time when it can be fully printed. So what did he do next? No. Krishna book. Now you tell me why Prabhupada decided to do a summary study of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
So that attraction can be there.
More, explain more. Take the mic. So that attraction can be there. That's very vague.
Some conception that God is a person would be instilled in the hearts of the population.
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
Wasn't it that he wasn't sure he was going to be able to finish the whole Bhagavatam?
Of course, that's part of it.
He wanted to present the 10th canto.
That's definitely part of it. What's the name of the movement that Srila Prabhupada started? The International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Isn't it kind of important that the members of the movement will understand who Krishna is? Okay? How important that was. And the story of how it happened that Srila Prabhupada told Shyamasundar and go and ask George for the printing cost. That's a whole amazing story. I'll read it to you sometime. It's like Krishna just did it. He caused all the lights to go out. He's caused a huge thunder, just as he was asking. And George was starting to sour because he didn't like, you know, he had allowed access to himself because they never asked for anything. But he was already offering. He was offering to buy thousands of pounds worth of marble for the altar for the first temple in London. And he bought it that same day. And Shyamasundar visited him, and he had with him this one artist, sculptor, from the Queen of England, you know, and he came there to help choose the marble. So he spent that, and he was very happy, he's doing his part, but then, and Prabhupada even told Shyamasundar, go and ask George, and then he tried to explain to Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, you know, if we ask him for more, then there's, you know, he knew that George would be like that. So then Prabhupada said to him, he said, just ask. Just ask. You will see. And he had a certain look in his eyes. And so Shyamasundar went with them to the marble place, and then after that they went to George's house. And his wife was preparing dinner along with Malati, Shyamasundar's wife. And they're sitting, and they're discussing, then they have their dinner, and then after the dinner they're sitting and drinking some hot tea or whatever. And then he brings up the subject. And he brings all the transparencies of the book. All the, you know, what do they call them? Transparencies or color separations or whatever. Prabhupada had presented to George, Prabhupada had presented to Shyamasundar, show these to George. So he began to show them color separations of the paintings, this, that, you know. And George is sitting there. And, you know, Shyamasundar is getting around to the point of actually telling him that Srila Prabhupada is requesting that you can help with the printing cost. And he Shyamasundar writes in the book how George's face was starting to.
It was a huge amount of money too, right?
Well, for him it was not that much. It was 19,000 pounds or something like that. But the principle was that was the thing. So, Shyamasundar, he just makes up his mind. Prabhupada told me to do it, I'm doing it. And he just started to present it. And he was just about to tell that Prabhupada wants you to print this. And then all of a sudden, a gigantic thunder, lightning, because it was already raining outside a little bit, right? Then the lights go off. And they're sitting there. And like a whole minute goes by, they're all silent. And suddenly the lights come back on, and George is smiling at Shyamasundar and saying, how much is it? So he comes back later with the check from George to Prabhupada. It's like 10 o'clock at night. He reports in to Prabhupada at his room, at his apartment he was staying. And then, he tells the story to Srila Prabhupada. And anyway, he pays his obeisances to leave so Prabhupada can take rest. But then Prabhupada calls to him again. And then, yes, Prabhupada? He turns around. And Prabhupada says, I told you. So anyway, the stories of how the pure devotee manifested the whole literatures that will be needed for the world, for now into the future, thousands of years. Literally. This is not some like exaggeration, thousands of years. No. This is it. So Srila Prabhupada's books, he said, my books will be the law books of human society for the next 10,000 years. He used to say that, 10,000 years. But Gurudev extended it to the very end of Kali Yuga. Now, Krishna book. Now that was there. When I walked into the temple in 1970, it was sitting there, hot off the Japanese press, on one of those book stands. And I sat down and I'm paging, I'm looking at. It was exactly around that time when it was distributed to all the temples. And from the moment I joined, we were reading the Krishna book stories. In the van, going out for Sankirtan, somebody's reading. While we're having lunch, somebody's reading. Huh?
Hot milk.
Hot milk at night, somebody's reading.
Was it already illustrated then, the way it is now?
The Krishna book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because all the paintings were done, and Prabhupada brought all those color separations to Japan. Dai Nippon printer was the name of the printer. So, yeah, it was beautifully printed, you've seen. And it was a 2-volume printing. Quite big, coffee table size, and very impressive. Very impressive. Yeah, so then, after that, what book then Srila Prabhupada gave? It's either that or Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. I don't know exactly which one came first, but let's take Teachings of Lord Chaitanya first. Prabhupada knows that the ultimate Shastra, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, is the absolute treasure of the Gaudiya Vaishnava societies. And he knows that unless they hear about Lord Chaitanya, his teachings, his life, as Chaitanya Charitamrita is giving, then they also won't understand the Hare Krishna movement. Because that same Krishna came again, And so it's essential that somebody will study at least what the teachings are, because after all, Srila Prabhupada gave his pranam mantra to all of his disciples, and what did it say? Yes, Gauravani Pracharani. So they're going to have to know what is the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So Prabhupada wrote it. Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And what is in that book? Yeah, that's one.
The 5 major
Conversations.
Shiksha, Rup Shiksha,
Yes.
Sanatana Shiksha,
Right.
Vatyacha,
No. Sarvabhaum, Bhattacharya, Prakashananda Saraswati, and Rai Ramananda Sambhava. So, it's very high. I mean, look at Sanatana Siksha. 5 chapters of Chaitanya Charitamrita. How he presented that. If you read it, it's very amazing how Srila Prabhupada, shows the language and everything to make this comprehensible. But it's such high topics. I mean, he's talking about the Vishnu forms in the spiritual world, and the Chaturvyuha, Vishnu expansions, and then they expand into 24. That's one chapter, He's holding the conch in this hand and the lotus flower in this hand, So, but the whole philosophy is there. Sanatana Siksha, amazing. And then Rupa Goswami. Only one chapter, 19th chapter of Madhya Lila. Prabhupada presented that in that book. And there is the foundation of Rupa Goswami's, of all of the books that he wrote. And the subject matter of Bhakti Rasa. Bhakti Rasa. And what to speak of Rai Ramananda Sambhad, reaching to the highest pinnacle. That's why Gurudev's book is called Pinnacle of Devotion, because it is. So, and Mayavadism, very necessary that those 2 conversations, one with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and Vedanta Sutra, and Prakashananda Saraswati, and in both cases he's absolutely defeating and converting Mayavadis into Vaishnavas. That was a big topic back then. I was just listening the last week or so to Srila Prabhupada's first recorded Bhagavad Gita lecture. I think I mentioned that in the class. It's really long. I mean, he's only got a couple of people in the room, but he's recording it. And he's at least for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. I listened to it in parts. But he addresses the misconception of oneness, liberation, right? And he begins to explain that there's 5 types of liberation. And why the Vaishnavas, they don't want this merging and oneness. So right from the very beginning, Srila Prabhupada is faced with this. Because in that community of people, there were a lot of people that were coming in contact with different books that were popular in the West at that time, coming from Indian philosophers and so forth, and also Buddhism and things like that. So Prabhupada had to very carefully and very patiently explain why oneness is not real liberation for the jiva. Yes, it's possible, he said, because Krishna is the father of all living entities, and if one living entity wants to merge into his existence, he'll say, yes, come on. Prabhupada's saying like that. But that is not a very good decision to make. So anyway, these are the books I tell to new people when they ask me. So I just say, well, I'm going to recommend to you the very books that I also read when I was new. And I explained that these are the books which Srila Prabhupada gave when he didn't know that he would have more time, how much more time he would have to complete Srimad Bhagavatam and so forth. But now he has a fledgling society and it's growing. And so by 1970, he had those 5 books. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Oh, I didn't talk about the Nectar of Devotion. That's what we're going to read now. Nectar of Devotion. And what was the other one?
Srimad Bhagavatam.
Huh?
The Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah, Srimad Bhagavatam. So 5 books. So I usually tell the new people, read 4 of these books. I don't include the Srimad Bhagavatam. I include the others because it's doable. You read the whole book, you know. Some people have actually done that. So the Nectar of Devotion is Srila Prabhupada's summary presentation of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharika Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Govinda Jiyo Ki Jai. And now, what did Srila Prabhupada, he named this the such and such book for our society. Remember? He called it?
The Complete Science of Bhakti Yoga.
Right, but he called it the handbook of the Krishna consciousness movement. Because the Krishna consciousness movement, that's the picture at the festival. That first time I saw
Most beautiful picture you'd ever seen.
Yeah, and the first time I saw Krishna and Radha without knowing whatsoever who these people are. But
Little did you know.
huh?
So little did you know.
Yeah. Now, so yeah. The Krishna consciousness movement is the movement of Lord Chaitanya to introduce everyone to the process by which they can attain spiritual perfection in their eternal relationship with Krishna. Okay, so there is a system that Mahaprabhu himself introduced in this world, and he spoke it directly to Srila Rupa Goswami. And it's the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is like a treatise of the science of Bhakti Yoga, right? Science of Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is the process. And through practicing the process of Bhakti Yoga, then one will gradually begin to be able to taste the ecstatic moods, which are called Bhakti Rasa. So from the very beginning, we were understanding that this Krishna consciousness movement is for attaining ecstasy. Yeah, we were aware of that. We've joined this movement and we're giving up intoxication, this, that, so that we can become qualified to experience ecstatic relationship with Krishna. And there is no question in our mind, is this actually going to happen? No, because we are already experiencing so much joy and happiness and peacefulness and freedom from anxiety and all these things, right? Because why? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has told us, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. As soon as you start, immediately the cleansing begins, and then it leads to Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. So this is a tangible experience. Tangible. And therefore, the devotees applied themselves obediently, with the full dedication, living all together, leading a completely detached life from material, achievements and material endeavors and material desires. Sure, they were certainly there to some extent, but there was a much higher taste. The other day I was going over that verse with Yuvati, higher taste verse. Do you know the higher taste verse from Bhagavad Gita? 2nd chapter, Krishna's telling. Yes, that's the sentence. Param drishtva nivartate. Param drishtva, param means supreme or superior. A superior drishtva, taste, experience. So Krishna says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina. Raso varjam raso piyasya param drishtva nivartate. Rasa is in that verse. Rasa varjam rasopyasya. There it's being used as taste, the word taste. Rasa varjam rasopi asya. So although the taste for sense objects remains when one vishaya vinivartante, nir aharasya, one is not engaging in indulging the senses in sense gratification, right? So he said, a person may restrict his senses from sense gratification, although the taste for the sense objects still remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he becomes what? Fixed in consciousness. Fixed in consciousness. So that's the whole principle, is a higher taste. So we all knew that what we were doing, it was completely approved by Prabhupada. Sunday feast day would come, and yep, our senses were fully absorbed in the feast, in the kirtan, even the kirtan. It was all exciting, very exciting. And the temple room filled up with all these new people, you know. So this was really happening. Huh?
Party.
Yeah. Yeah, and even every day, going out on the streets. Who sings and dances on the streets every single day? Huh?
Salvation Army.
No, they don't. They don't dance. And they don't do it every day. They only do it at Christmas time. So, now Srila Prabhupada is going to explain to the whole world, what is this book? The Nectar of Devotion is a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which was written in Sanskrit by Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada. He was the chief of the 6 Goswamis, who were the direct disciples of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When he first met Lord Chaitanya, Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada was engaged as a minister in the Mohammedan government of Bengal. He and his brother Sanatan were then named Dabir Khas and Sakar Malik, respectively, and they held responsible posts as ministers of Nawab Hussain Shah. At that time, 500 years ago, the Hindu society was very rigid, and if a member of the Brahmin caste accepted the service of a Mohammedan ruler, he was at once rejected from the Brahmin society. That was the position of the 2 brothers, Dabir Khas and Sakar Malik. They belonged to the highly situated Saraswata Brahmana community, but they were ostracized due to their acceptance of ministerial posts in the government of Hussain Shah. It is the grace of Lord Chaitanya that he accepted these 2 exalted personalities as his disciples and raised them to the position of Goswamis, the highest position of Brahminical culture. Similarly, Lord Chaitanya accepted Haridas Thakur as his disciple, although Haridas happened to be born of a Mohammedan family. And Lord Chaitanya later on made him the Acharya of the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now Prabhupada begins to tell about Lord Chaitanya's movement. Lord Chaitanya's principle is universal. Anyone who knows the science of Krishna and is engaged in the service of the Lord is accepted as being in a higher position than a person born in the family of a Brahmana. That's pretty revolutionary. Anyone. He's not telling. He's just saying anyone. And what's the criterion? He knows the science of Krishna. And he's engaged in the service of the Lord. Then he is accepted in a higher position than a person born in the family of a Brahmana. That is the original principle accepted by all Vedic literatures, especially by Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. The principle of Lord Chaitanya's movement in educating and in elevating everyone to the exalted post of a Goswami is taught in the nectar of devotion. Lord Chaitanya met the two brothers, Dabir Kas and Sakar Malik, in a village known as Ramakeli in the district of Malda, and after that meeting, the brothers decided to retire from government service and join Lord Chaitanya. Dabir Kas, who was later to become Rupa Goswami, retired from his post and he collected all the money he had accumulated during his service. It is described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that his accumulated savings and gold coins equaled millions of dollars and filled a large boat. He divided the money in a very exemplary manner, which should be followed by devotees in particular and by humanity in general. 50% of his accumulated wealth was distributed to the Krishna-conscious persons, namely the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. 25% was distributed to relatives, and 25% was kept against emergency expenditures and personal difficulties. Later on, when Sakar Malik also proposed to retire, the Nawab was very much agitated and he put him into jail. But Sakar Malik, that's Sanatana Goswami, who was later to become Srila Sanatana Goswami, he took advantage of his brother's personal money, which had been deposited with a village banker, and he escaped from the prison of Hussein Shah. In this way, both brothers joined Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we've heard these stories and the whole detailed story from Chaitanya Charitamrita. But just imagine how they came. Like in the Sad Goswami Astakam by Srinivasacharya, he's saying, Tyaktva Turnam Ashesha Mandalapati Shrenim Sada Tuchavat. What does that mean? It means Tyaktva, they gave up, completely abandoned all connections with this aristocratic position of their government position, everything. Sada Tuchavat. Tuchavat means like completely with complete neglect, they gave that up. Budva Dina Ganesha Ko Karunaya Kopina Kantashrito. And later on, they simply dressed themselves in a very humble way with dor kopin, loincloth, torn cloth, and they were completely very, very Dina Ganesha Ko Karunaya Kopina. Why? Because they were going to show the example for all the fallen souls. But Gopi Bhava Rasamritabdi Lahari Kalola Magno Muhur. They became completely overwhelmed with Gopi Bhava Rasamritabdi Lahari, the waves of the ocean of Gopi Bhav. Kalola Magno Muhur. So, Bande Rupa Sanatana Raguyago Sri Jiva Gopalako. This book, Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada is introducing our gurus, the ultimate gurus of the Krishna consciousness movement. If he did not give this book, if he did not translate Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, then how the Krishna consciousness movement could be established. Prabhupada sang the Sad Goswami Ashtakam, recorded it as soon as he had tape recorders. He himself sitting alone and singing, you see. So,
Mark, can I ask you a quick question? What does it mean when it says that Mahaprabhu was the direct, or that someone was a direct disciple of Mahaprabhu? Was there some kind of like formal initiation, or is it just accepted
No.
that Mahaprabhu directed.
No, like
instructed
Gurudev
them
said,
and stuff.
Mahaprabhu didn't give initiation to anyone.
So just
It's not like he gave mantra like Diksha Guru. But direct disciple means Siksha, especially Siksha. So these personalities had direct contact, and Mahaprabhu personally accepted them, also gave them instructions, go to Vrindavan and so forth. Each one of the 6 Goswamis, their own stories are unique. Some were children like Jiva Goswami, and we heard how Jiva Goswami was told by Nityananda to go to Vrindavan, even though Mahaprabhu was in Puri. So no, don't go. So they all followed Mahaprabhu's instruction and ended up in Vrindavan. And they became the ultimate gurus of our Sampradaya, and they gave the literatures, and they showed the example, they rediscovered the pastime places, they did the work. So anyone who's a serious follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or wants to be, they'll have to study the literatures that were left by the 6 Goswamis. That's why Narottam Das Thakur is praying, Rupa Raghunatha Pade Hoive Akuti Kabe Hama Bhuj Habose Jugala Piriti. When will I become eager? Akuti, eagerness. To, and Prabhupada translates this as study the books of the 6 Goswamis. Follow in the footsteps of the 6 Goswamis. Then, Kabe Hama Bhuj Habose Jugala Piriti. Oh, when will I understand what is the love of the divine couple? Only by following Rupa and Raghunath. And Prabhupada said Rupa Raghunath also means from Rupa to Raghunath, all 6 Goswamis. So, yes, the Lord, Rupa Goswami first met Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya at Prayag, which was called Allahabad at that time. And on the Dashashvamedha bathing ghat of that holy city, the Lord instructed him continually for 10 days. Now, how long did Mahaprabhu instruct Sanatana Goswami?
Was it 4 months?
2 months. And in Rupa Goswami's case, 10 days. That's why there's only 1 chapter in Chaitanya Charitamrita. The Lord particularly instructed Rupa Goswami on the science of Krishna consciousness. These teachings of Lord Chaitanya to Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada are narrated in our book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Later, Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada elaborated the teachings of the Lord with profound knowledge of the revealed scriptures and authoritative references from various Vedic literatures. Srila Srinivasacharya describes in his prayers to the 6 Goswamis that they were all highly learned scholars, not only in Sanskrit, but also in foreign languages such as Persian and Arabic. They very scrutinizingly studied all the Vedic scriptures in order to establish the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the authorized principles of Vedic knowledge. The present Krishna consciousness movement is also based on the authority of Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada. We are therefore generally known as Rupanugas, or followers in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada. It is only for our guidance that Srila Rupa Goswami prepared his book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is now presented in the form of the Nectar of Devotion. Persons engaged in the Krishna consciousness movement may take advantage of this great literature and be very solidly situated in Krishna consciousness. And from this point, Srila Prabhupada now begins to explain what is bhakti. Bhakti means devotional service. I'm just doing a little because we're going to have the artik. Bhakti means devotional service. Now here is what Prabhupada says. Every service, just service, every service has some attractive feature which drives the servitor progressively on and on. Every one of us within this world is perpetually engaged in some sort of service. And the impetus for such service is the pleasure we derive from it. Driven by affection for his wife and children, a family man works day and night. A philanthropist works in the same way for love of the greater family, and a nationalist for the cause of his country and countrymen. That force which drives the philanthropist, the householder, and the nationalist is called rasa. or a kind of mellow relationship whose taste is very sweet. Bhakti rasa is a mellow different from the ordinary rasa enjoyed by mundane workers. So that's what we're going to study tomorrow. What is rasa? How Prabhupada is explaining this, so that any ordinary person can understand. Huh? So ingenious, Srila Prabhupada. Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Rupa Goswami Pada ki jai, Gaur Premanandi. Vansha kalpatarubhascha, kripa sindhu vedascha, patikanam pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo namo namah.